I'm honored to have somebody join me in studio, which means he's as crazy as I am. This is beautiful, and it says so much about this wonderful human being, and I wish I could hug you, and in this COVID-centric world, I'll give you a virtual hug.
Right back at you.
I'm honored to have with me Mr. David Brickman. David Brickman, whose career spans 2 decades in 5 divisions at Freddie Mac, is the Chief Executive Officer of one of the largest providers of mortgage financing in the world. I want to come back, though, before I go through his credentials and all that. We can talk about that. I like David not just because he is a smart CEO and he runs a big organization that can make change for people at the bottom of the pyramid at scale. I like him for things like what just happened here today, which I didn't know. I didn't know you were showing up today. I assumed it was virtual like everything else. So I did something this week, David, that's my wife would prefer I didn't do. I got on a plane and I flew to Alabama to do a Chamber of Commerce speech because they asked me to 5 months ago, and I promised I would, and I just figured they'll turn it into a virtual meeting, and I'll do it virtually. And when the time came, they decided they were just going to do it in person. And I figured if they were crazy enough to hold an in-person meeting, I was going to be crazy enough to show up. It was my first business trip in 8 months on a plane, and they did it. They did it right. I mean, Mobile, Alabama, Mobile Chamber of Commerce. They did really great, social distancing, the whole thing. But I'm not sure that they thought I was going to show up. I didn't know if they were going to do it. They didn't know if an audience was going to show up. You know, courage is oftentimes really simple. It's doing things in spite of your concerns, not because of them, because you believe and you lean into them. And it's extending yourself beyond your comfort zone. That's leadership. You showing up here today is, to me, just another example of who I know you to be. Extending yourself beyond your comfort zone. Doing more than you have to. Last time I saw you in person, we were in Washington, D.C., when we could still shake hands. And you actually physically came over. I was having lunch with the comptroller of the currency, and you said hello, and we reacquainted ourselves. You didn't have to do that. You could have just kept on walking like most CEOs would have, because they're important. I was supposed to come to them. But you weren't a CEO. You were just a human being doing a job. I don't even need to ask you that. You have a humility in your soul. So thank you for showing up.
You're more than welcome. I didn't want to miss an opportunity to be with you, John. I mean, it's a privilege, a pleasure. When you invited me, obviously, if it wasn't capable to be done safely, I wouldn't have done it. But knowing you, knowing Operation Hope, knew it could be, and wasn't going to miss the opportunity. And I am so thrilled to be here with you and be able to participate in the Hope Forum.
Well, I'm honored. Event. This is being broadcast all around the world, streamed all around the world, and in some cases broadcast, thanks to our media partners. And so folks will be able to get and replay this important conversation. And I think it is an incredibly important conversation because when you look at the history of this country, wealth came from real estate. And I believe the largest reverse wealth transfer in the history of America was slavery, because we didn't get the benefit of our labor and working. And I wanted you also, David, when you tell a bit about your background professionally and personally, as much as you want to. We're just having a conversation here.
Sure.
But so we didn't get the benefit of our labor working, and then we were capital blacks, so we couldn't create capital. We were capital. So we couldn't get the labor, and we didn't have any capital, and we couldn't own real estate. And this went on for 300 years. And even the indentured servants that came from Europe, who were poor white, were given 50 acres per person. So land has defined America through the agrarian age, the industrial age, the information age. It's still defining wealth.
Yes.
So you sit in a very unique position. How does your background growing up or being as a professional inform the job you're doing right now? And do you see it as a job or a mission? I think I know the answer to that.
You did kind of give it away. It's a mission, clearly, in terms of what I hope to accomplish, and certainly what Freddie Mac seeks to do. I mean, we have an explicit mission: liquidity, stability, and affordability in the housing market. But what underneath that, it really starts taking on tones around equity in the housing market. And John, when you mentioned slavery reform and the effect on Black and African American wealth creation, I mean, just the inability to accumulate. I also look back just at what we've seen in the last 20 years in terms of the great financial crisis. How many years ago now? Just
2000, was it 2009?
13 years ago, 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And similar in terms of, not similar, but just the significant negative effect it had on communities of color across the board in terms of that lost accumulated wealth and housing. And certainly as we look forward at Freddie Mac, part of what we think is how can we find achievable, sustainable pathways to home ownership for everyone, but in particular, given what we see in front of us today, what more can we do particularly for the Black and African American community? And we've been thinking a lot about that. I've charged all the leaders at Freddie Mac to think about what more we can do, because it's really a deplorable issue that we've got in terms of the home ownership gap. 30 points and rising. We're back to levels that we hadn't seen since the 1960s. And I think talking about my mission is thinking about ways, innovative ways we can address that. You're talking about capitalism before, and certainly I think that's one of the great things about an institution like Freddie Mac is we live primarily in the private sector, but with overtones in terms of the public sector and the government. We are a government-sponsored enterprise, and look at how can we leverage that to achieve good outcomes.
Give the audience a little texture on how big your job is. Like, how big is Freddie Mac? What's the impact on, because not everybody here is a financial genius or financial expert watching this broadcast. Some people may not have even heard of Freddie Mac or heard about it in passing. They really don't understand what it does, how it operates.
Sure, I appreciate that. And we are one of, or along with our sister company, Fannie Mae, probably largest companies people have generally never heard of, or unfortunately, if they have heard of us, some of the things that people would have said back, in the past. We're a $2.5 trillion company. We don't originate mortgages, we buy them.
$2.5 trillion. Not a government, not a country, okay? It's a company. One company, $2.5 trillion. Okay, one more time.
And the beauty of the model, in my mind, is that we are only in one market. We're just in housing.
Right.
We're in single family and in multifamily, so we're also in the rental market. But that's all we do. We don't do anything else. We have a government charter, so unlike a true private company, we can't go do credit cards or automobiles or foreign exchange trading. We only ever do housing, which means 24/7, 365 days a year, we are thinking about what more we can do for the health of our market. And as I mentioned before, we do have this mission broadly, which, it's in our DNA, not just as an institution, but honestly through the entire leadership ranks, through every employee, I think, who works at Freddie Mac. How can we better serve that mission in a way that, again, is going to help in terms of home ownership, is going to also provide stability to the market, is going to address issues in terms of housing affordability, which are have already been at kind of at crisis levels and unfortunately only going to get worse.
At $2.5 trillion, give some people some sense, because I'm saying this for a reason, David. I want to pivot to impact. Give people a sense of how. Okay, there's 350 million people in America. There's however many households. Sure. What's your penetration into those households, to the U.S. housing market?
So we hold or guarantee about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 mortgages in America.
Yep.
Well over 10 million, and the standards.
10 million homes.
Yes.
Yep.
Similarly, in the multifamily market, probably similar numbers, about 20% of
apartment buildings.
Of apartment buildings we have financed.
Yeah.
I think it's important to point out that overwhelmingly in real estate, people grade real estate A, B, C. A is kind of the highest end in rental. B and C, so on. We're primarily in the B and C market. We're in what we primarily call workforce housing.
Yeah.
Or rental housing that provides safe, decent rental housing for essential workers and others. But again, to your question about scale, it's about 1 in 5, 1 in 6 homes that we finance. But I think where it's going is that the standards that we create, and again, along with our sister company, Fannie Mae, probably affect more than 1 in 5 or 1 in 6, probably affect everyone in terms of creating standardization that I think helps everyone, creates a more liquid market, creates lower costs, creates the ability for those who even aren't selling mortgages to us to kind of ascribe to a standard that ensures that it's responsible lending on many levels, as well as, again, providing greater liquidity to the market broadly.
So I think we've established how big, and it's big, the company is and its impact on the nation. You've almost got a quasi-governmental imprimatur, even though you have a private sector role.
Yep.
And what he says and what they do matters and has a ripple effect beyond the check that they write or what they underwrite and guarantee. So philosophically, what you do and embrace is important.
Yeah.
David, you asked me to come talk to your leaders at Freddie Mac, which I've agreed to do in a town hall.
We're very much looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it as well. That wasn't happy talk. We didn't do that because we liked each other. My guess is, we didn't talk about this, but my guess is you're trying to build a culture or expand or to refine and upgrade the software of the culture so that your special forces team, your senior management are then able to go out and expand and deepen this mission so that it's more equitable.
Yes.
For all of God's children. Am I got that right?
You've got that exactly right. And I kind of mentioned before is we've always had equity and addressing inequity kind of front and center in terms of what we want to do, but really it kind of got ratcheted up this summer that we have to do more. That while I think we've done a lot, the problem's getting worse.
Yep.
And we have to think a little more outside the box and ways we can do things differently. And I think that comes both inside the organization, in our industry broadly, given the size that we've gotten, as I was describing, kind of standardization. I mean, we have a bully pulpit to talk to the broader mortgage industry, and we seek to use that. And then ultimately, in terms of the housing market itself, what more can we do in terms of the housing market? And so I've challenged all the leaders in Freddie Mac with thinking about new things we could do to change, again, who we are, how we do business, how we have influence over the industry and the housing market. And you're coming to talk to us, I think, is fantastic in terms of inspiring all our leaders and all our employees as to how they can do more on all of those fronts.
Changing the conversation, changing the culture, changes where capital goes.
Yes.
Did you guys get that? Changing the conversation, changing the culture, also changes where capital goes.
You got it.
Question. So let's now get into some levels of depth here, David. In the 7 minutes or so we have left, I want you to freeform as much of this as you like. We have a 40-year-old social justice reckoning for Black America that we're dealing with in 2020. We've got a global health pandemic, which is causing people to shelter at home. Yeah. But if you don't own a home, that's a challenge unless you're dealing with affordable rentals, which I know is something you have had an interest in. You guys are trying to innovate around. Then you've got an economic crisis, which makes it tougher when people don't have a job or their finances are impacted to become a homeowner. You have the largest decrease of Black home ownership since World War II that we're dealing with right now, certainly since the Civil Rights Movement, down to the 40s, I believe, % of Blacks who own a home. That can't be good for America. No. You have a Citigroup report shows $16 trillion of penalty, a levy on America's GDP because of racism against Blacks in the last 20 years alone. These are all economic indicators, not racial indicators. We're better together. And home ownership, real estate is where people build, the average family builds wealth.
Absolutely, yes.
So what are you doing that you can talk about that are leading into this issue of racial and other, racial and socioeconomic inequality, diversity and inclusion today and going forward?
So we'll start maybe with our own organization. And I was alluding to it before, we are looking at how we can become more diverse as a company ourselves. We are a majority minority company today, but we need to do better. We're looking at different ways that we can recruit, bring new people in, partnering with the Thurgood Marshall Fund, the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, others, bring more people broadly into the mortgage industry, because hasn't historically been as diverse as it needs to be, certainly not as diverse as the communities that we serve.
So let me back up. The Thurgood Marshall Fund and what was the second one?
Hispanic Scholarship
Fund. That's designed to give a broader pipeline of young people who can come into the mortgage industry from the bottom up, right?
That's exactly it.
All right, continue.
And then once in Freddie Mac, we've really empowered our we call them business resource groups to help train people, provide mentorship, help ensure people have a voice, have a community inside the company, and we really integrate them in how we do our business processes. But then moving outside Freddie Mac, outside our company, to the industry broadly, thinking about ways in which, given how large we are and how much influence we have in terms of other suppliers, other businesses we do, how do we, again, embed diversity in our day-to-day business? And we've been encouraging minority and women-owned businesses to do more with us. So we create supplier academies to help train people.
A supplier academy.
Supplier academies.
So you're mentoring and coaching up these small black-owned and minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses of how they can do business with you successfully.
That's right. And we do it broadly, also a particular focus in the capital markets, where we do a lot of work, ensuring that we are working with minority and women-owned businesses when we're doing bond issuances and other things in the capital markets. And then for all the...
Excuse me, for those, when they raise money in Wall Street, they're trying to make sure that minority-owned firms get a piece of that business.
That's right.
The contracts that are tied to the laddering up of raising capital. Just trying to translate here a little bit.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification. And then broadly, with all of the mortgage banks we work with, because I mentioned before, we're not in the primary mortgage market, meaning we don't originate mortgages. That's why most people haven't heard of us. Rather, literally thousands of mortgage banks, from large banks to small originators, sell us mortgages. We've always reviewed them, provided scorecards, as you will, in terms of performance on credit and performance in terms of the economics. Increasingly now we're bringing diversity into that as well, in terms of how do we think about those who do business with us in terms of their performance broadly, in diversity, ensuring they have diverse and inclusive organizations.
That's powerful. So wait a minute. So just so to be clear, if you get a loan with, I'm going to pick them up, pick on Truist Bank or J.P. Morgan Chase, First Horizon Bank, it doesn't matter, Regions Bank, there's a 30% chance if the mortgage is under $600,000 that Freddie Mac's backstopping that mortgage. They're going to sell it to Freddie Mac. Okay, so you're doing business with Freddie Mac, you just don't know it.
Exactly.
And Freddie Mac has criteria to the bank that's mostly underwriting based, where they know if they write the loan along this criteria, Freddie Mac will buy it.
Yes.
So it gives them liquidity.
That's right.
And what David is saying is he wants to use this beachhead, this opportunity, is to expand that conversation to say, look, if you want Freddie Mac as your partner, if you want us to give you liquidity, then we need to make sure that you're best in class in areas that are also around diversity, inclusion.
That's right, in your organization. And making that part of the dialogue. And John, I'll get in a little trouble. So we don't do business directly with any borrowers. By our statute, we don't do that. It is exactly your point. It is the standards we create, is the way in which we do business.
I said that, he didn't.
But I do want to get the last piece of it. So looking to have some influence on our industry, but then most importantly is really having some influence on the housing market. And this issue again of deplorably low home ownership rates in the African American community that have been exacerbated just by hundreds of years of discrimination and bias, but manifest in terms of things like lower credit scores and obviously lower income and
higher interest rates.
Higher interest rates. And so thinking, what more can we do to help provide those pathways through offering loan products that might help someone get on that ladder into home ownership. Thinking about new products, we have a sweat equity product for kind of lower down payment, where sweat equity in a home, your work on the home can be credited towards the down payment. We're looking at
sweat equity is not non-cash contribution.
Exactly. We're looking at ways in which we can think about credit differently, because we also know so much of the community, unfortunately, is underbanked or even unbanked, and so means not a lot of households don't have a credit score. So how can we look at credit differently to help people get qualified? And lastly, something you know far better than I do is providing counseling and outreach, letting people know what they can do, what options are available for them in order to get started with the process ultimately of becoming a homeowner.
If Freddie Mac does half of what they just talked about, just half, you'll change America, because they have such a Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae together can have an impact on almost 100% of the mainstream mortgage market. Again, you cannot call him and get a loan. That's not what they do. Okay.
Appreciate that.
You cannot call Freddie Mac and say, I want you to write my mortgage. You can call your local financial institution, and they may have an agreement with Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae. But what David is trying to do is to set a back channel standard, to change the narrative, what defines good business in America, responsible lending in this space. What's good for everybody? How do you raise up all of God's children and give everybody a shot? I mean, I think it was FHA in the 30s, literally redlined.
Yes.
I mean, literally, it was the government. It was the government that literally drove a red line. That's where the phrase came from. It wasn't private banks. It was the government wrote a red line in the 1930s and said, we're not going to insure mortgages in this area. We feel it's unsafe. Well, it was unsafe because blacks were slaves and enslaved and kept from capital and education for so long. We were just struggling with thin capital files. So this just made it worse. So then values in white neighborhoods got bigger and black neighborhoods got lower. And what I hear David saying now is, in many ways, if others can join in with him, you're bringing all that back into balance again.
That's what we're trying to do.
And if he does this, values will begin to creep up in so-called black neighborhoods. Same home that's in a white neighborhood. The values will creep up. Capital will become more available. Companies will be more interested to lend everywhere. They'll change how they operate.
That's the dream.
That's the dream. Look, this has been beautiful. I'm over time because I've enjoyed it so much. Yep. Thanks for coming to Atlanta.
John, a great pleasure to be with you, and keep up the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Is there any final words you want to share with the audience?
No, it's a pleasure to be here, and we hope we can realize on all of the things we've talked about.
I want you to keep people like this in your prayers, everybody. He's a good man. You don't know his name, but you should. He's got more impact on your life than every rapper and basketball player and everybody else that you admire, that you watch every day. And you want to encourage him to be encouraging to his team, so that they can do more for all of us. Thank you, David.
Thank you, John.
All right.